The hillside is packed. Not a congregation sitting in rows, not a lecture hall with assigned seats. A crowd, the kind that forms when word travels faster than roads can carry it. Fishermen who left their nets half-mended. Mothers with children balanced on their hips. Pharisees standing at the edge with their arms folded, watching. Tax collectors crouched near the back, close enough to hear, far enough to run. The Sea of Galilee glitters below. The air smells like fish and dust, and the particular tension that gathers whenever this man shows up. He sits down. In the world you and I inhabit, a teacher sitting down means the lesson is over. In first-century Jewish culture, it means the opposite. When a rabbi sits, he is taking his official teaching position. He is saying, what comes next is authoritative. What comes next matters. The crowd goes quiet. He opens his mouth. And the first word out of his mouth is not a commandment, not a theological argument, not a rebuttal of his critics standing at the edge of the crowd. The first word is a scene. A specific, ordinary, dusty scene that every person on that hillside has watched 1,000 times. A farmer went out to sow his seed. That's it. That's how the greatest teacher who ever lived begins the greatest body of teaching in human history. Not with a thesis statement. With a farmer. With seed. With dirt. There is one parable, not the most famous, not the longest, not the one you learned in Sunday school with the colored pictures, that Jesus said was the master key to understanding every other parable he ever told. He said that if you cannot understand this one, you cannot understand any of them. We will get to that parable. But not yet. First, you need to understand what a parable actually is, because here is what it is not. This is not a collection of moral fables dressed up in Bible clothes. This is not a Sunday school flannel board exercise for children who need simple pictures. This is not ancient advice from an ancient culture for ancient people with ancient problems. This is a coded map. A deliberate, architecturally precise, spiritually loaded map, and Jesus told his own disciples, privately, in a house, away from the crowds, that if they could not read this map, they could not understand anything he taught. That is not a metaphor. That is a direct quote. The disciples came to him after the crowds had gone home, after the hillside had emptied, and they asked him the question you are probably asking right now. Why? Why do you speak to the people in parables? Why the stories? Why not just say it plainly? You're the Son of God. You know the truth. Why hide it inside a story about a farmer? And Jesus answered them with a word that stops most people cold when they read it carefully. He said, because the knowledge of the secrets in the Greek, the word is mustérion, which does not mean mystical fog or spiritual confusion. It means revealed secret, truth that has been locked in a vault and is now being handed, deliberately, to people who are ready to receive it. Because the mustérion of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you. But not to them, stay with me. Because this is the part that changes everything about how you read the Gospels. Jesus is saying out loud to his disciples that he is intentionally speaking in a way that some people will understand and others will not, and he is not apologizing for it. He quotes the prophet Isaiah 8 centuries earlier. Isaiah stood before God and was told to go preach to a people who would hear but not understand, see but not perceive, a people whose hearts had grown calloused. And Jesus looks at his disciples and says, that prophecy is being fulfilled right now, on this hillside, with this crowd. Which means every parable is doing two things at once. On the surface, a story anyone can follow, a farmer, a lost sheep, a wayward son, a woman who loses a coin, accessible, human, familiar, underneath, a map, a set of coordinates pointing to something the casual listener will walk away without ever finding. The Hebrew word for parable is mashal, and mashal does not mean cute story. In the wisdom tradition of ancient Israel, a mashal was a weapon, a riddle, a dark saying, a puzzle crafted to make the listener work. The rabbis used it the way a locksmith uses a key, not to keep people out, to let the right people in. Jesus picked up that tradition and carried it further than anyone before him. He spoke in parables constantly, so constantly that Matthew tells us he never said anything to the crowds without using one. Not a single public sermon, not one open-air teaching, always a story. Always a scene, always a farmer, a shepherd, a king, a woman, a son. And always underneath the story, a map that most people walked away, never reading. You are about to read it. It is a specific afternoon in the specific town of Capernaum on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus has just come from a confrontation with the Pharisees that nearly turned violent. They have accused him of casting out demons by the power of the devil himself. The air between them is not academic disagreement. It is the particular cold fury of powerful men who feel their authority slipping. And now he is outside, and the crowd has followed him, and he sits down by the water, and he begins to tell stories. Not one story, not two. Matthew chapter 13 records 7 parables in a single sitting: a seed, a weed, a mustard seed, a woman hiding yeast, a hidden treasure, a pearl, a fishing net. 7 stories, one after another, each one a different angle on the same thing, the kingdom of heaven. But before the mustard seed and the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price, the Pharisees arrive. And they are not alone. They bring with them the tax collectors and the sinners who have gathered around Jesus. And the Pharisees are grumbling, out loud. The Greek word is diagonguzo, a word that sounds like what it means: a low, persistent, bitter murmur. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Here's what most people miss. Luke chapter 15, the chapter that contains the 3 most famous parables Jesus ever told, does not begin with Jesus deciding to teach about lostness. It begins with the Pharisees grumbling. The parables of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son are not 3 separate sermons delivered on 3 separate occasions. They are one triple-barrel argument, fired in sequence, aimed directly at the men standing at the edge of the crowd with their arms folded. Jesus turns to face them, and he begins. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Suppose one of you. He is talking to the Pharisees. He is putting them inside the story before they know what hit them. A shepherd has 100 sheep. One goes missing. What does the shepherd do? He leaves the 99 on the open hillside exposed, unguarded, vulnerable to every predator that moves in the dark, and he goes after the one that is lost. He searches until he finds it, and when he finds it, he does not drag it back. He lifts it onto his shoulders. He carries it home. And then he calls his neighbors and his friends and says, "Rejoice with me. I found my lost sheep." Now, you need to understand what this story sounds like to a Pharisee. A Pharisee's entire theology of holiness is built around separation. You do not touch the unclean. You do not eat with sinners. You do not risk the 99 righteous for the sake of one who wandered off through their own choices. That is not faithfulness. That is foolishness. And Jesus looks at them and says, that is exactly what God does. The stakes of this story are personal. 1 sheep, 1 soul. 1 person sitting at the back of the crowd who thinks they have wandered too far to be found. And the shepherd is already gone from the fold, already climbing the ravine, already calling that one name into the dark. If that is you, if you are the 1 sheep, you need to hear this. He is not waiting for you to find your way back. He has already left to find you. But Jesus does not stop there. He tells the story again. Different details, same shape. A woman has 10 coins. She loses 1. In 1st century Palestine, 10 silver coins on a woman's headband was almost certainly her dowry. Not pocket change, not grocery money. Her financial identity, her future, her security in a world where a woman without resources had almost none. She lights a lamp. She gets down on the dirt floor of her 1-room house, and she sweeps every corner, every crack, every shadow, until she finds it. You can feel the grief in that image. A lamp lit in the middle of the day because daylight through a low Palestinian window is not enough. Hands and knees on a dirt floor. The particular desperate focus of someone who has lost something they cannot afford to lose. And when she finds it, she calls her neighbors. "Rejoice with me. I found my lost coin." Same punchline as the sheep. Same rhythm. Same ending. Jesus is establishing a pattern. He is teaching you how to hear what comes next. Because what comes next is the story the first 2 stories were building toward. The story so large, so layered, so brutally honest about the human condition that 20 centuries of theologians have not finished unpacking it. But before we get there, pay attention to this. The Pharisees are still standing at the edge of the crowd. They have heard about the shepherd. They have heard about the woman. And in their heads, if they are honest, which is the dangerous thing about a good parable, it forces you to be honest. In their heads, they know the shepherd did the right thing. They know the woman did the right thing. You do not abandon the lost. You go after it. Jesus has just gotten them to agree with him without realizing they agreed. That is what a mashal does. It gets past your defenses before you know your defenses are down. And now he tells the third story. There was a man who had 2 sons. 10 words. And every person in that crowd already knows this is going to be about them. The younger son comes to his father and says, "Give me my share of the estate, now, before you die." In first-century Jewish culture, this is not a rude request. This is not a teenager being difficult. This is a son looking his father in the face and saying, in the clearest language available to him, "I wish you were dead. I want what I would get if you were gone. Give it to me now." The father could have refused. Any court in the land would have backed him. Any rabbi within 100 miles would have told him to refuse. But the father divides his property between them, and the younger son leaves. He travels to a far country, and the phrase far country in Greek is kora makrion, which means not just geographically distant, but relationally, spiritually, cosmically far. He goes as far from his father as a human being can go. He squanders everything. The Greek word is diaskorpizo, to scatter, to throw to the winds. Everything the father built over a lifetime, scattered. And then the money runs out. And then a famine comes. And then the younger son finds himself in a pig pen, which, for a Jewish audience, is not just poverty. It is ritual defilement, the absolute lowest a Jewish man can go. He is feeding pigs, longing to eat what the pigs eat, and no one gives him anything. You know this feeling. Maybe not the pig pen, maybe not the famine, but the moment when the thing you ran toward turns out to be empty. The moment when the far country delivers exactly what it always delivers, which is nothing. The moment when you look around at what your choices have produced and you think, "How did I get here?" He comes to himself. That is the phrase Luke uses. He came to himself as if the person he had been in the far country was not really him at all, as if the genuine version of him had been waiting, somewhere inside the wreckage, for the moment he would finally wake up. He rehearses a speech. He will go home. He will say, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." It is a good speech, humble, honest, appropriate. He practices it walking down the road. And then the father sees him. While he was still a long way off, still far, still dirty, still rehearsing his speech, still not sure if the door would even open, the father sees him. And the text says the father was filled with splonch-nizomai. That Greek word means the deepest, most involuntary, most physical compassion a human body can produce. His gut moved before his feet did. The father does not wait for the speech. He runs. In first-century Middle Eastern culture, a man of dignity does not run. Running means lifting your robe, exposing your legs. It is undignified. It is beneath a patriarch. It is the behavior of a child, not a father. The father runs anyway. He throws his arms around his son. He kisses him. The Greek says he kissed him repeatedly, again and again, before the boy can get a single word of his rehearsed speech out. The son starts talking. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy." The father is not listening to the speech. He is already calling for the robe, the ring, the sandals, the fatted calf. He is already throwing a party for a boy who came home smelling like a pig pen. This is the part of the story you have heard 100 times. The prodigal comes home. The father runs. The feast begins. And if the story ended there, it would be the most beautiful story ever told about forgiveness. But it does not end there. Because there is another son. The elder brother is in the field when the party starts. He hears the music, and the word Luke uses for music is symphonia, which is where we get symphony. He hears the symphony starting up inside the house, and he asks a servant what is happening. The servant tells him, "Your brother has come home, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound." And the elder brother refuses to go in. He stands outside. The music is playing. The feast is happening. His father is dancing. And the elder brother plants his feet in the dirt outside the door and will not move. The father comes out to him. Again, the father goes out, first to the younger son on the road, now to the elder son at the door. The father in this story is always moving toward the one who is far away. The elder brother lets him have it. "Look, all these years I have been slaving for you. I never disobeyed your orders. And you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours," he does not say, "my brother." He says, "This son of yours comes home after wasting your money. You kill the fatted calf for him." Here's what most people miss about this moment. The elder brother is not wrong about the facts. The younger son did leave. The younger son did waste the money. The elder son did stay. He did work. He did obey. Everything he says is factually accurate. What he is wrong about is the father. He has been living in his father's house for years, working, obeying, serving, and he has experienced none of it as love. He has experienced all of it as transaction. He has been keeping score in a ledger the father never asked him to keep. And now the ledger does not balance, and he is furious. The father says to him, "Son," the word in Greek is teknon, which is more tender than the ordinary word. For son, more intimate, more like my child than simply son, you are always with me. And everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate. We had to be glad. Because your brother was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And then the story ends. Jesus stops talking. He does not tell you whether the elder brother goes inside. He does not give you the resolution. The Pharisees are standing right there, at the edge of the crowd, and Jesus has just described them with surgical precision, men who have been in the Father's house their whole lives, keeping score, furious that God seems to be throwing a party for people who do not deserve it, and he leaves them holding an open ending. Will you go in? That is the question the parable leaves hanging in the air. Not just for the Pharisees, for you. For anyone who has ever been faithful and felt overlooked. For anyone who has ever done everything right and still somehow ended up standing outside a door that seemed to be opening for everyone except them. The music is still playing, the door is still open, and the Father has come outside again to ask you to come in. Now, if you are finding this video helpful, if these stories are landing differently than they have before, would you consider subscribing? We are only halfway through the map. The most dangerous parables are still ahead. And in a few minutes, we are going to get to the one parable Jesus said was the key to understanding everything else he ever taught. You do not want to miss that. There is a road that drops 700 feet in 17 miles. You need to know this about the road from Jerusalem to Jericho before you can understand what happens on it. It is not a gentle country lane. It is a descent, steep, rocky, winding through limestone ravines where the rock formations create natural hiding places on both sides. Roman historians called it the Way of Blood, not because of what Rome did on it, because of what bandits did. Travelers were robbed on that road so regularly that it was considered reckless to travel it alone. A lawyer comes to Jesus with a question. He is not asking because he wants to learn. Luke tells us he is asking to test Jesus and behind the test, to justify himself. The question is, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus bounces it back to him. What does the law say? The lawyer recites it perfectly. Love God, love your neighbor. Jesus says, correct. Do this and you will live. And then the lawyer asks the follow-up question that changes everything. And who is my neighbor? It sounds like a clarifying question. It is not. It is a limiting question. The lawyer wants to know where the boundary is. How far does the obligation extend? Who counts and who doesn't? Which people are included in the category of neighbor so that he can safely exclude everyone else? Jesus answers with a story. A man no name given, no ethnicity specified, which is itself a choice, is traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho. He falls into the hands of robbers. They strip him, beat him, and leave him half dead on the road. He is lying there in the dust, bleeding, unable to move, unable to call for help. A priest comes down the road. He sees the man, and he passes by on the other side. Before you judge the priest too quickly, you need to understand his dilemma. Under Mosaic law, a priest who touched a corpse became ritually unclean for 7 days. The man on the road might be dead. If the priest touches him, and he is dead, the priest cannot serve in the temple. He has a genuinely serious theological reason to keep walking. He keeps walking. A Levite comes. A Levite serves in the temple. He has a similar concern. He looks at the man. He passes by on the other side. And this is where it gets remarkable, because the crowd listening to Jesus already knows what comes next in the pattern. Priest, Levite, Israelite. That is the standard 3-part Jewish story structure. The third character is always the ordinary Jewish man who saves the day. The crowd is waiting for him. They are already nodding, already anticipating the resolution. Jesus does not give them the Israelite. He gives them a Samaritan. You cannot fully feel the impact of that word unless you understand what it meant to a first-century Jewish audience. The Samaritans were the descendants of Jews who had intermarried with Assyrian settlers after the northern kingdom fell. They had their own temple. their own version of the Torah, their own religious practice. And to a Jerusalem Jew, a Samaritan was not just a foreigner, he was a half-breed heretic. The contempt ran in both directions. Jewish travelers going from Galilee to Jerusalem would add days to their journey rather than walk through Samaria. The hero of Jesus' story is the man the crowd would cross the street to avoid. The Samaritan sees the man on the road, and he has splanchnismai, the same gut-level compassion the father had for the prodigal son. He goes to him. He pours oil and wine on the wounds, oil to soothe, wine to disinfect, both from his own supplies. He bandages him. He lifts him onto his own donkey. He walks while the wounded man rides. He takes him to an inn and spends the night caring for him. In the morning, he hands the innkeeper 2 denarii, 2 days' wages, and says, "Look after him. If you spend more than this, I will reimburse you when I return." No obligation, no law requiring it. No social contract, no ethnic bond, no religious duty connecting this Samaritan to this stranger bleeding in the road. Just mercy. Jesus looks at the lawyer and asks, "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" And the lawyer cannot say the word Samaritan. He cannot make himself say it out loud. After everything Jesus has just described, the bandaging, the donkey, the inn, the 2 denarii, the promise to return, the lawyer still cannot put the word Samaritan in his mouth. He says, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus says, "Go and do likewise." That is the whole answer. Go and do likewise. Not, go and define your terms more carefully. Not, go and establish the precise boundaries of your neighborly obligation. Go and do. What that man did. The parable does not answer the lawyer's question. It destroys it. The question was, who is my neighbor? Jesus reframes it entirely. The question is not, who counts as your neighbor? The question is whether you are willing to be one. Hold that thought, because Jesus tells another parable, and this one is aimed at a different target. Not the Pharisees grumbling at the edge of the crowd. Not the lawyer trying to justify himself. This one is aimed at the disciples. Peter has just asked a question. They have been walking. Jesus has been talking about the kingdom of heaven, and Peter, impulsive, direct, always the one who says out loud what everyone else is thinking, stops and asks, "We have left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us?" It is an honest question, maybe even a slightly transactional one. We gave up our boats. We gave up our families. We gave up our income. What is the return on this investment? Jesus answers with a story about a vineyard owner. Early in the morning, before sunrise, before the heat, a landowner goes to the marketplace to hire workers. He finds men standing around waiting for work and he hires them. They agree on a wage, 1 denarius for the day, a fair wage, the standard rate. He goes back at 9 in the morning. More workers standing idle. "Go work in my vineyard," he says, "and I will pay you what is right." He goes back at noon. At 3 in the afternoon. At 5 o'clock, with 1 hour of daylight left in the working day, he finds more men standing there, and he sends them into the vineyard. When evening comes, the landowner tells his foreman, "Pay the workers. Start with the last ones hired." The men hired at 5 o'clock come forward. They worked 1 hour. They receive 1 denarius. The men hired at dawn see this, and they think, if the men who worked 1 hour got a full day's wage, surely we who worked through the heat of the day will get more. They are already doing the math. They are already calculating their bonus. They receive 1 denarius, and they are furious. These men worked 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who bore the burden of the work and the heat of the day. The landowner looks at the man speaking and says, "Friend," and that word, in the Greek hater, is not warm. It is the same word Jesus will use to address Judas in the garden. It is the word you use when the relationship has become something other than what it should be, friend. I am not being unfair to you. Did you not agree to work for 1 denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? And then Jesus looks at Peter, who asked what he would get for following, and says, "The last will be first, and the first will be last." This is not a parable about fairness. This is a parable about the danger of keeping score. The workers hired at dawn are not wrong about the facts. They did work longer. They did bear more heat. But somewhere across the course of that long day, they stopped working for the agreed wage and started working for more than the agreed wage without anyone offering them more. They promoted themselves, in their own minds, to a category that was never offered to them. And when reality did not match the category they had invented, they called it injustice. Here's the part nobody tells you. Peter asked, "What will there be for us?" And Jesus answered, "Everything I have promised you, exactly as promised, not a denarius less. But if you spend the next 3 years calculating your reward compared to everyone else's reward, you will arrive at the end furious, and you will have missed the vineyard entirely." The parable is not a warning against latecomers. It is a warning against scorekeepers. There is a moment in Mark chapter 4 that most people read past without stopping. Jesus has finished telling the parable of the sower. The crowd has dispersed. The hillside is quieter now, just the inner circle, the 12, a few others who had been following closely. And they come to him with a question. Not the question you would expect. Not what does the parable mean. Not can you explain it. The question is, why parables at all? And Jesus answers them. And then he says something that has stopped serious readers of the Gospels cold for 2,000 years. Don't you understand this parable? He is talking to his disciples, the men who have left everything, the men who have been with him for months, watching, listening, following. And he looks at them and says, "Don't you understand this one? How then will you understand any parable?" This is the moment the open loop closes. That parable we mentioned at the very beginning, the one Jesus called the master key to all the others, this is it. Not the prodigal son, not the Good Samaritan, not the workers in the vineyard. The parable of the sower, the first one, the farmer, the seed, the dirt. This is not a story about agriculture. This is not a story about first-century farming techniques. This is not a story about what kind of soil you happen to live near. This is a story about every human heart that has ever encountered the Word of God and the 4 ways that encounter can end. 4 soils, 4 responses, 1 seed. The first soil is the path hard, compacted, impenetrable. The seed lands on it, and the birds come immediately and take it away. Jesus says this is the person who hears the word and does not understand it, and the enemy comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. Not because the seed was weak, because the ground was closed. The second soil is rocky ground. There is a thin layer of dirt over a shelf of limestone common in Galilee. You can see it still today on the hillsides above the lake. The seed sprouts quickly because the soil is warm and shallow, but the roots have nowhere to go. When the sun comes up, when trouble comes, when persecution comes, when following Jesus costs something real, the plant withers. Jesus says, this is the person who receives the word with joy but has no root. They believe for a while, and in the time of testing, they fall away. You know people like this. Maybe you have been this person. The faith that blazed bright in a revival meeting or a youth camp or a hospital room, and then the ordinary heat of an ordinary Tuesday came, and there was nothing left. The third soil is thorns. The seed goes into good ground, good depth, real root system. It grows. But the thorns grow alongside it, and the thorns are named. Jesus names them. The worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, the desire for other things. They grow up and choke the plant. It does not die dramatically. It does not fall away in a moment of crisis. It is choked, slowly, quietly, until it produces nothing. This is the most dangerous soil of the 4, because it looks, from the outside, like growth. The plant is there. The roots are real, but the fruit never comes because everything the plant has is being consumed by what is growing next to it. And then the 4th soil, good soil, deep soil, soil that receives the seed and holds it and lets it go down and take root and grow without restriction. And it produces a crop 30, 60, 100 times what was sown. Jesus does not tell you which soil you are. He tells you what the soils look like and leaves you to answer that question yourself. Now watch what happens next, because here is where the parable stops being ancient and becomes uncomfortably current. C.S. Lewis, one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century, a man who spent decades as an atheist before his conversion, a man who understood the intellectual resistance to faith better than almost anyone, wrote something in Mere Christianity that landed like a key in a lock when I first read it. He said that the reason myth and story move people in ways that argument cannot is because story bypasses what he called the watchful dragon. The watchful dragon is the part of your intellect that sits at the gate of your heart and evaluates every incoming idea for threat. Every argument, every proposition, every theological claim has to get past the dragon. And the dragon is very good at its job, but story walks around the dragon. Story enters through a different door, the imagination, the emotion, the place in you that responds before the critical mind can intervene. And by the time the watchful dragon realizes what has happened, the truth is already inside. Lewis wrote that in 1952. Jesus was doing it in AD 30. Every parable is a story that walks past your defenses and plants something in the soil of your heart before you know it has been planted. The farmer, the shepherd, the woman, the father running down the road. These images do not argue their way into you. They simply arrive. And they stay. The only question that matters after watching a video like this one is what kind of soil they are landing in. If this video has opened something in you, if the parables are landing differently than they used to share it with one person, not because it helps the algorithm, because that is what the sower does. He scatters seed, widely, generously, without calculating which ground looks most promising. You scatter it. God handles what grows. And now, the final thing, because there is one more parable that does not get preached enough. One more story Jesus told that contains the most quietly devastating image in all the Gospels. A king prepares a wedding banquet for his son. He sends his servants to call the guests people who have already been invited, people on the list, people who said yes when the invitation first arrived, and they refused to come. He sends more servants. They refuse again. Some ignore the invitation entirely. Some seize the servants, mistreat them, kill them. The king is furious. He sends his army. And then he does something extraordinary. He tells his servants, the banquet hall is ready, the food is prepared, the music is waiting. Go out into the streets, every road, every corner, and invite everyone you find, good and bad alike. Bring them all. And they do. They fill the hall with strangers, people who were not on the list, people who had no reason to expect an invitation. The hall is full, and the wedding feast begins. But then the king walks in to see the guests, and he sees a man not wearing wedding clothes. This detail is lost on modern readers, but it would have been immediately understood by Jesus' audience. In first-century culture, a host of means would provide wedding garments to guests who arrived without them. The clothes were available. All you had to do was put them on. This man chose not to. The king asks him, friend, and again, that word heter, the word that is not quite warm, how did you get in here without wedding clothes? The man is speechless. He has no answer. And the king has him removed. Jesus ends with, many are called, but few are chosen. This is not a parable about exclusion. This is a parable about preparation. About the person who accepts the invitation, who comes to the feast, who walks through the door, who takes a seat at the table, but never actually puts on the clothes. Never actually changes. Never actually allows the invitation to transform them. They are present. They are inside. And they are still, somehow, not at the wedding. The parables of Jesus are a map. And every map has the same purpose, not to tell you about a place, to get you there. He told 37 of them, across 3 years, in fields and houses and temple courts and upper rooms. 37 different angles on the same truth. The kingdom of heaven is here. It is available. The invitation has gone out. The door is open. The feast is ready. The Father is on the road. What will you do with the seed? We started on a hillside above the Sea of Galilee. A crowd, a teacher who sat down, a farmer who went out to sow his seed. And in the 2,000 years since that afternoon, scholars have written libraries trying to decode what Jesus was doing when he opened his mouth and told stories instead of sermons. Theologians have argued about the parables. Commentators have categorized them. Preachers have preached them so many times that the words have worn smooth, like river stones that have been handled so often you can no longer feel the edges, but the edges are still there. The shepherd still leaves the 99. The woman still lights her lamp and gets down on the floor. The father still sees his son while he is still a long way off, still far, still filthy, still rehearsing a speech. The father has no interest in hearing, and he still runs. The Samaritan still stops on the blood road. The workers hired at 5 o'clock still receive the same wage as the workers hired at dawn. The seed still falls on 4 different kinds of ground. And the elder brother is still standing outside the door. 3 things. The first thing is this. Jesus did not tell parables because the truth was too complicated to say plainly. He told parables because the truth was too important to hand to people who were not ready to receive it. The mashal, the riddle, the dark saying, the story with edges was a filter and an invitation at the same time. It filtered out the casual listener and invited in the hungry one. If you have made it this far into this video, you already know which one you are. The second thing is this. Every parable Jesus told was aimed at a specific person in a specific moment with a specific problem. The lost sheep was aimed at Pharisees who had decided some people were not worth finding. The Good Samaritan was aimed at a lawyer who wanted a boundary instead of a calling. The workers in the vineyard was aimed at a fisherman who wanted a return on his investment. The Prodigal Son was aimed at every person who has ever stood outside a feast, either because they ran away or because they never ran anywhere and still somehow ended up outside. They were aimed then, they are aimed now. And if one of them hit you today, if one of them landed somewhere in you that you were not expecting, that is not an accident. That is the sower. That is the seed. That is what a parable does when it finds the right ground. The third thing, and this is the one I want you to carry out of this video, is the simplest and the hardest. The elder brother is still outside. Not the younger son, not the prodigal, not the one who ran, the one who stayed, the one who worked, the one who did everything right and somehow ended up in the dark, listening to a party he cannot bring himself to enter, furious at a grace he cannot bring himself to accept. Jesus ended that story without an ending, on purpose, because the ending belongs to you. The music is still playing inside. The robe is on the younger son's shoulders. The calf has been killed. The neighbors have been called. The feast is at full volume. And the father has come outside again, always moving toward the one who is far, and he is asking. He is not demanding. He is not commanding. He is asking. Come in. Please. Your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. We had to celebrate. We had to be glad. The door is still open. Which parable in this video hit you the hardest? Was it the shepherd leaving the 99? The father running down the road? The elder brother standing in the dark? The seed landing on your particular patch of ground? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if these stories have meant something to you today, if the map looks clearer than it did 30 minutes ago, share this video with one person. Not for the algorithm, for the sower. You scatter the seed, you let God handle what grows. Jesus didn't tell stories to entertain crowds. He told stories to find people, and he is still telling them.